Those people do this for a living, and they're telling us that what we're doing is the right thing to be doing. That's my thoughts, and I would not pass this bill.
And those are the thoughts of Republican Representative Chris Allgood from Caldwell. He was opposing a bill to restrict who qualifies for an absentee ballot. So why? Well, because he's following the testimony of Idaho Secretary of State Phil McGrain. You know, Phil McGrain, the guy who got more votes in the last election than any other candidate across any other race. Well, McGrain told the committee absentee ballots are safe and secure in Idaho. He also added they're a crucial tool for people in remote parts of the state who wouldn't or don't live near conveniently a polling place. And despite no widespread evidence of voter fraud in Idaho, the bill to limit absentee ballots passed committee. An amended version of the bill has floated on the State House floor for weeks, on the floor, House floor that is, for weeks now. And the discussion about absentee ballots, well, it doesn't seem to stop at the State House. You could be concerned about election integrity, sure, but are absentee ballots the problem? Here's Andrew Bartline.
The discussion around absentee ballots is growing in Idaho, and the unofficial motto around Idaho's elections hasn't moved an inch.
The mantra is easy to vote, hard to cheat, right?
Tim O'Donnell represents a group called Election Integrity Idaho.
And that's what we're concerned about is cheating enough that it changes the outcome of an election.
Are you confident in our elections?
I think Idaho is in pretty good shape compared to other states, but that's a pretty low bar. So I think there's things that we can do to secure things, and the absentee voting is absolutely #1 thing we can do to secure our elections here.
That's why O'Donnell supports House Bill 205, sponsored by Republican Representative Joe Alfieri. The bill would restrict absentee ballots only for active military, people who are sick, disabled, or hospitalized, those at work or university, a religious mission, or anyone occupying a second home.
My main objection is, how do we enforce that?
Kathy Ackerman is the Idaho County Clerk.
It's concerning to me that people think that we're just mailing ballots, randomly to the public and not keeping track of who receives a ballot, who it's intended for, and whether that ballot, who it was intended for, comes back from that person. So part of that is a signature verification process. So we are checking that.
What place do these absentee ballots have in rural Idaho?
There are limited opportunities for public transportation, for one thing. Sometimes people just don't have an ability to get to their polling location. Idaho County is huge. If you've looked at a map, you can see that.
But O'Donnell says it's not the same as voting in person, where poll workers have eyes on every ballot at all times.
But when you drop it in the post office box, we have no visibility of those ballots at that point. The Postal Service is a union that is basically endorsed Joe Biden for president. So anybody who's Republican wants to hand their ballot over to a partisan organization, I don't think that's wise.
You believe the Postal Service is a partisan organization?
Well, I think their union is. They endorse the candidate.
It's not a shared concern among Ackerman and other election workers in the state, including Secretary of State Phil McGrain, because they say there's no evidence of any widespread voter fraud in Idaho elections.
For what that's worth, I'm not sure, because sometimes people are convinced otherwise, and it doesn't matter what I say. They're going to be convinced that there's fraud, whether we can prove it or not. So that's a challenge.
O'Donnell derives a lot of suspicion about election integrity from the Heritage Foundation.
Heritage Foundation is a think tank. It's a conservative think tank. Conservative legislators, Republican legislators, should at least acknowledge their argument.
But their argument in the Gem State only reports 10 instances of voter fraud.
There's no fraud here in Idaho.
The most recent?
This is a waste of time.
Was 6 years ago.
Right. If it hasn't happened in Idaho yet, great. We don't really know that, but let's close the door so we don't, it's just a matter of time before it can happen. So why leave the door open?
Governor Brad Little also expressed his support for absentee voting because of the value he says it provides to rural Idaho. I think a debate upcoming, his exact words were, he's not all too excited about it. He said that a couple weeks ago. We expected to see House Bill 205 on the House floor today. That bill did not get debated or received a vote, but it is still floating around waiting for action. And we asked Ackerman, Brian, what does absentee voting look like in Idaho County specifically? She said of 11,000 votes, this was last November, 917 of them were absentee. So it plays a role, but this idea that absentee voting is taking over regular voting, the data just isn't there, and not even in rural parts where it has the most utility from what we've heard from election workers.
I mean, I do the math correctly. It's about 10%, a little less than 10%.
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. The question I have is for Mr. O'Donnell, does he give Christmas cards to his mail carrier? That's what I'm curious about. I would wonder if that...
We can ask him, Brian.
How his mail service might be. All right, thank you very much, Andrew.